HOA built a mansion on my land. A massive, extravagant estate with pools, tennis courts, and private gates, without realizing they were digging their own grave. Imagine the look on Karen Miller's face when she found out the land she claimed, the palace she built, was never hers to begin with. Instead of fighting the HOA from the start, I let them pour millions into their mistake. I stood by in silence as Karen, the power-hungry HOA president, bulldozed my grandfather's farmland, declaring it part of her empire. She thought she had won, until I revealed the one thing that could destroy everything she built. Karen Miller had always exuded an air of authority within the Maple Ridge community. With her tailored blazers and perfectly coiffed hair, she was the embodiment of ambition, channeling her energy into every HOA meeting and neighborhood event. When she was elected president of the Homeowners Association, it felt like a coronation to many. She took the role with the fervor of someone who believed they were destined for greatness. But behind her polished exterior lay a hunger for power that often overshadowed the interests of those she was meant to serve. The community's perception of Karen was mixed. Some admired her assertiveness, while others whispered about her penchant for overstepping boundaries. She pushed through regulations with little regard for dissent, positioning herself as an arbiter of taste and exclusivity in Maple Ridge. Her plans included not just maintaining property values but reshaping the very essence of the neighborhood, envisioning manicured lawns and grand homes that would elevate Maple Ridge into a paragon of suburban luxury. Yet, as her influence grew, so did the whispers about her dubious methods. Rumors swirled about how she acquired funds for her ambitious projects, conjectures that hinted at shady dealings and money laundering. Despite these allegations, Karen continued to climb higher on her gilded pedestal, unbothered by scrutiny as she plotted lavish developments designed to attract wealthier residents. The expansion of the HOA's reach began to feel like a personal crusade for Karen, where she was not just president but monarch. When I learned about her latest endeavor, a sprawling mansion with ostentatious features, my heart dropped. It wasn't just any mansion, it was being erected on my land, my family's legacy transformed into mere backdrop for her dreams of grandeur. The bulldozers were not only ripping through dirt, they were shattering my memories and plans for what I thought my property could become. My grandfather's teachings echoed through my mind. Land ownership is sacred, a tether to our past and future. In witnessing this affront unfold under the banner of Karen's authority, anger coursed through me like wildfire, but I resisted the urge to confront her directly. Instead, I chose silence as my weapon. The more she built, the more I quietly observed from afar, cataloging every detail while gathering my arsenal, property surveys that traced back generations and a deed that proclaimed my ownership unequivocally. As Karen poured money into what she envisioned as a palace fit for royalty, complete with glistening pools and a private tennis court, I was biding my time. This slow-burn revenge plan thrived in secrecy. While she reveled in her apparent victory over me, I focused on securing what was rightfully mine. Little did she know that each brick laid in her opulent mansion would soon become instrumental in constructing her downfall. The phone call from my grandfather's old neighbor shattered an otherwise ordinary afternoon. His voice trembled with urgency, and the words came out in a frantic rush that sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. "They're tearing down your land. Bulldozers everywhere." At that moment, time seemed to warp around the gravity of his message, each second stretching painfully as I struggled to comprehend what he was saying. I dashed from my house, the reality of the situation kicking in with every step. Memories flooded my mind, summer afternoons spent on that very land, family gatherings where laughter filled the air, the legacy my grandfather had built and cherished. The thought that someone could obliterate all of that in a matter of days was unfathomable. As I approached the site, the sound of machinery grew louder, drowning out every thought but one. I had to see it for myself. When I finally arrived, a scene of chaos greeted me. Dust billowed into the air as monstrous bulldozers clawed at the earth, ripping through what had been my sanctuary. The sight was surreal. It felt as though my childhood had been wrenched away from me. Then I spotted her, Karen Miller, standing proudly near the construction site with a self-satisfied grin, as if she were presiding over a grand accomplishment. It took everything within me to remain composed at that moment. Here she was, the new president of the HOA, her dreams manifesting as a multi-million-dollar mansion complete with opulent pools and pristine tennis courts, a palace rising defiantly from what was rightfully mine. It felt like watching an invader claim territory on which they had no right to stand. Each swing of the excavators felt like a dagger to my heart. I could see her revel in her own ambition while I stood paralyzed, anger and betrayal coursing through my veins like fire. A fortress of arrogance, she seemed to regard this as merely another project in her list of triumphs, blind to the destruction spiraling around her. Yet instead of confronting her, I could feel how tempting that would be. I chose restraint. The burning rage inside me needed direction. Confrontation wouldn't serve my long-term goals. My mind raced with potential strategies as I forced myself to take deep breaths and observe quietly. How foolish she was to believe she would face no consequences for this land grab. In that moment of chaos and upheaval, a plan began to crystallize in my mind. Rather than fight on her terms amid bulldozers and dust clouds, I would wait. I would gather all evidence necessary to reclaim what was mine and let her lavish mansion become her own downfall. Each day, I witnessed her carelessly pour money into her construction while I would meticulously prepare my counterattack in silence, sowing seeds of revenge until the time was ripe for harvest. The devastation I felt upon witnessing the bulldozers tearing into my land was overwhelming, an emotional avalanche that buried me in memories and a profound sense of loss. Each roar of the machinery felt like a personal attack, a violent intrusion not just into my property but into my very identity. This land was more than just soil and grass. It was a tapestry of family history woven together with laughter and love, a sanctuary where my grandfather had instilled values in me. Now, all of that was being ripped apart under the weight of Karen Miller's ambition. As I stood there, watching the destruction unfold, memories flooded my mind like a tide I couldn't hold back. I remembered summer afternoons spent running through those fields, the scent of wildflowers filling the air while my grandfather taught me about the beauty of nature and responsibility. Family gatherings echoed in my heart, barbecues beneath sprawling trees, children's laughter mingling with stories of bygone days. That land was a legacy, a connection to my roots, and now it felt as if someone was erasing it all, one scoop of earth at a time. Betrayal coursed through me like ice water. How could Karen Miller stand there with her smug smile, unbothered by the history she was dismantling? It wasn't just land to her, it was an opportunity to flaunt wealth and power, to build a monument to her own ego while disregarding the lives intertwined with that place. Each thud of the bulldozer's blade against the ground resonated with my anger and disbelief. I felt as if I were losing a part of myself, a vital piece that shaped who I am. In that moment, I grappled with conflicting emotions, rage at her audacity and sorrow for what was being lost. Yet amidst this turmoil, there was something else. A flicker of resolve began to burn within me. Instead of succumbing to despair or running headlong into confrontation, I recognized that immediate reaction would only serve her narrative. So much had been taken from me already, now was not the time for reckless decisions. I forced myself to take deep breaths as I observed the scene unfolding before me. The chaos felt surreal, almost like watching a nightmare play out in slow motion. The dust swirled around me, obscuring my vision but sharpening my focus on what needed to be done next. This wasn't just about retrieving land, it became clear that this was about preserving my family's legacy and standing up against her tyranny. I resolved then to act with calculated precision rather than raw emotion. The destruction might haunt me for now, but it would fuel my determination moving forward. I would gather every shred of evidence, every document that proved ownership and history, allowing Karen Miller to believe she had triumphed while I prepared for the moment when her arrogance would crumble under its own weight. Each day she built her mansion would bring me closer to reclaiming not only my land but also restoring honor to my family's name. As the weeks passed, Karen Miller's mansion took shape, transforming my family's land into a glaring symbol of excess and disregard. From my vantage point, concealed by trees and brush, I watched the construction unfold with a mixture of disdain and disbelief. What was once a vibrant tapestry of nature was now dominated by heavy machinery and the staccato rhythm of hammers and saws, all orchestrated under her watchful eye. The mansion emerged like a behemoth rising from the ground, each floor more opulent than the last. Towering walls, painted in shades of ivory and cream, caught the sunlight, casting long shadows of arrogance over what had once been an untouched landscape. The architecture flaunted every modern luxury imaginable, expansive terraces that led directly to landscaped gardens, intricate stonework that spoke to untold wealth, and towering windows that gleamed like eyes watching over my loss. Karen's vision for this estate was nothing short of grandiose. It seemed she was intent on building a castle rather than a mere home. As I stood hidden behind the trees, I could see her supervising every detail, her perfectly manicured nails directing workers with a casual flick, her expression one of pure satisfaction. I imagined her envisioning herself as royalty, cloistered within the high walls of her domain, far removed from the ordinary lives around her. The piece de resistance was the infinity pool, which gleamed like liquid sapphire under the sun. It sprawled across what had once been where we held family picnics and gatherings. Karen envisioned herself hosting extravagant parties here, inviting only those who could afford her world of luxury. Gazebos dotted the grounds, complete with fountains that sent water cascading gracefully against the backdrop of lush greenery, echoes of laughter and music likely to transform my childhood memories into echoes of a life I'd never live. Around the mansion, high walls began to rise, defensive barriers that not only obscured her from view but also defined her territory as if she were staking claim over something far more than just land. It struck me as both ironic and tragic. In her quest for grandeur, she excluded any sense of community or connection. The very essence of Maple Ridge seemed to wane beneath these towering structures that sought to elevate an individual at the expense of shared spaces. With each brick laid in her wealth-fueled castle, I felt my resolve strengthen. This excessiveness couldn't go unnoticed. It was not merely a personal affront but a statement against everything my grandfather had valued, a lesson in humility and respect for one another and the land we lived upon. As Karen reveled in her architectural triumph, unconcerned with the past or its significance, I prepared myself to act, not out of anger but out of a necessity to reclaim not just land but the principles that defined my family's legacy. I vowed to let her indulge in her fantasies as she poured money into this fortress while I bided my time. My patience would pay off. Eventually, such blatant disregard would come back to haunt her. Each day she built was another day closer to demonstrating that arrogance sparked by greed can only lead to ruin, and I would make sure she felt every consequence when it came time for me to lay claim to what was mine once again. Witnessing the destruction unfold on my land stirred a tempest of emotions within me: rage, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of betrayal. Each moment spent watching Karen Miller direct the construction of her ostentatious mansion felt like an affront to everything I held dear. Yet, despite the storm raging in my heart, I knew that confronting her in that moment would be unwise. Instead of succumbing to impulsive emotions, I made a conscious choice to embrace silence, an approach that would ultimately set the tone for my strategic plan. Choosing silence was not a sign of weakness, it was my declaration of intent. In my mind, Karen, with her inflated sense of superiority, would likely underestimate me while she reveled in her perceived triumph. I envisioned her sitting atop her throne of bricks and glass, blinded by ambition and arrogance, unaware that I had quietly positioned myself to reclaim what belonged to me. Reacting emotionally wouldn't serve my ultimate goal, it could jeopardize everything I planned to manipulate in the shadows. I remember standing there, hidden from sight yet filled with determination. The sounds of construction resonated heavily, each thud and grind pushing me further into my resolve. It took immense discipline to hold back the urge to confront her and demand respect for my family's legacy. But I understood that every moment spent gathering evidence in silence would yield far greater power than any vocal confrontation might achieve. Patience became my ally as I meticulously documented the progress of her home, taking notes not only on what I saw but on how she conducted herself amidst the chaos. Karen paraded around like a queen, oblivious to the undercurrents of resentment building among those who cared about the integrity of our community. Her dismissal of history and connection fueled my determination even more. That summer, I began to formulate a tapestry woven from legal documents, my grandfather's original property surveys and ownership deeds, each thread carefully selected to illustrate a story that her entitled construction was attempting to erase. While she threw lavish HOA parties in houses designed around opulence and exclusivity, I immersed myself in research at county offices, diligently uncovering records that detailed how my land had unjustly been absorbed into the HOA's development plans. As days turned into weeks, I watched her dreams take shape, a shining exterior cloaking an inevitable downfall. In allowing Karen Miller to believe she had triumphed through opulence and excess, I set myself up for victory by making every ounce of emotion work for me rather than against me. Each brick laid was another reminder that the foundation of this mansion was built upon hubris and deceit. I realized that ultimately this was not just about land, it was a quest for justice, for reclaiming not only my property but also the values my grandfather had instilled in me. My silence would speak volumes when the time came for action. Every moment spent patiently observing would culminate in a revelation that even Karen Miller could not dismiss. Her arrogance would be her undoing, and when the moment arrived, she would learn just how strong my resolve truly was. With determination coursing through me, I set out to gather the evidence needed to reclaim my land from Karen Miller's grasp. The first step in my quiet crusade was diving into the history of my family's property, a legacy that stretched back generations. I began by reaching out to local government offices where legal documents and records were kept. It seemed daunting at first, navigating through layers of bureaucracy, but I understood that this was a necessary endeavor. The county clerk's office became my second home over the next few weeks. Each visit revealed the intricate story of ownership that had been carefully documented over the years. I meticulously sifted through property surveys, each one depicting my grandfather's original boundaries, which had defined our family land long before it became a battleground for Karen's ambitions. The faded lines and annotations on paper were not just maps, they were testimonies of family gatherings and cherished memories tied to every inch of soil. After locating the original surveys, I turned my attention to the deed documentation. This was critical. Without proof of ownership, my case would be weak at best. I found the deed that documented our rightful claim to the land, signed by my grandfather himself, a tangible link to our heritage and an irrefutable piece of evidence against any fraudulent claims made by Karen or the HOA. Holding that document felt empowering. It served as a reminder that no matter how far she thought she could push her agenda, the law was on my side. Next came the task of uncovering how my land had been absorbed into the HOA's development plans. This was where things got murky. I learned about zoning changes and questionable approvals granted during town meetings that Karen had orchestrated with her usual flair for domination. Records hinted at irregularities. Meetings held without proper notifications to affected property owners raised red flags in my mind. It became clear that her ambition had led her down a path riddled with ethical dilemmas. I took meticulous notes during each discovery, ensuring I left no stone unturned in collecting information that would bolster my case. Each document painted a picture not only of ownership but also of neglect toward community values that Karen seemed determined to eradicate for her own selfish desires. As I gathered more evidence, I also began discreetly talking to neighbors who shared their concerns about Karen's approach and her disregard for local history and community ties. They expressed similar feelings of betrayal, not just for their own properties but for what Maple Ridge used to represent, a close-knit community where families thrived together rather than one dominated by excess. By piecing together this tapestry of facts and sentiments, I felt more prepared than ever to confront not only Karen but also the broader implications of what she represented, a stark contrast to everything my grandfather believed in. With every document collected and every conversation held in hushed tones among neighbors, my confidence grew. I was no longer merely an observer but an architect of justice waiting for the right moment to reveal my hand. The stage was being set for what would eventually unfold, a confrontation rooted not just in personal grievance but in collective memory and rightful reclamation. As her mansion continued to rise like a monument to arrogance on our shared land, I knew that soon enough it would become a monument to her downfall instead. As I remained in the shadows of my own land, it was almost surreal to witness Karen Miller invest an exorbitant amount of money into her grand mansion. Each extravagant feature added felt like a slap to my face, a tangible reminder of the legacy she was attempting to overwrite. While I gathered evidence quietly from the sidelines, she reveled in her architectural pursuits, growing more brazen with each lavish decision she made. It was as if every new addition elevated not just her home but also her ego, and I couldn't help but observe her transformation from a self-important HOA president to a queen draped in luxury. With every detail that rose before my eyes, a sprawling infinity pool that mirrored the sky, marble-clad walls echoing ostentation, and manicured gardens that screamed excess, I reminded myself of my purpose. Here she was, expending resources on what could only be described as a palace while reveling in the belief that she had triumphed over me and my family's legacy. I could almost see her on those grand balconies, basking in imaginary accolades from an audience that only existed in her mind. Each time I saw her indulge in an extravagant design or flaunt yet another unnecessary luxury, I could sense the seeds of arrogance taking root within her. Karen's delusions of grandeur were punctuated by events she hosted at the mansion, extravagant HOA parties where she showcased her wealth and power while all but ignoring the whispers and glances around her. I watched as she paraded through brightly decorated rooms filled with pretentious trinkets and gourmet food, completely disconnected from the history of the land on which she stood. It was a stark contrast to the gatherings my family once held, joyful celebrations grounded in community and connection. But my anger at witnessing such blatant disregard for what we held dear transformed into strategic resolve. Each day, the sounds of construction ringing in my ears as an unrelenting reminder of betrayal, I felt my strategy refine itself further. Karen's unwarranted confidence would soon become her undoing. The more lavishly she built and celebrated, the more vulnerable she made herself. Every stone laid was not merely part of a house, it was an invitation for scrutiny when the time was right. Karen naively believed that wealth could buy loyalty and silence within Maple Ridge, a belief that only further fueled my ambition to reclaim what belonged to me. With each luxurious feature added to her inflated edifice, I viewed it as fortification for the eventual confrontation I planned. I would allow her to thrive in this illusion for now, letting her immerse herself deeper into this world constructed from vanity and greed while I prepared for my counterstrike. The patience I had cultivated would soon pay off. Whatever grandeur she built upon this stolen foundation would ultimately crumble beneath its own weight. I knew Karen was oblivious to the mounting evidence against her and how every lavish gathering conducted under those high ceilings would serve as a stage for her downfall when the truth eventually unfolded. All in due time, I mused. Let her bask in triumph today. Soon enough, it would be me reveling not only in reclaiming my land but also restoring dignity to our name, a name intertwined with history far richer than any mansion could ever provide. As the construction of Karen's mansion reached its zenith, I meticulously turned my focus to the final preparations for filing my claim. Each legal document I had gathered over the last few months now became a critical piece of the puzzle, meticulously organized and ready to form a compelling case against her. I envisioned this act not merely as reclaiming land but as a profound statement against her tyranny, and it was essential that every detail was perfect. The first step in my planning was to categorize the evidence. My grandfather's original property surveys, the deed showing our ownership, and the county records that documented the irregularities of how my land was absorbed into the HOA's development plans needed to be accessible at a moment's notice. I invested hours in creating a detailed index, each document neatly labeled and organized within a binder that would allow me to present my case with clarity and precision. I could almost hear her mocking laughter whenever she flaunted her wealth, but I silenced it with thoughts of strategy and patience. My determination to bury her arrogance under a mountain of irrefutable evidence fueled my efforts. I began preparing not just for one confrontation but for all possible scenarios. It was vital that I was upfront and poised no matter how she tried to argue or diminish my claims. Next, I reviewed every pertinent detail within the legal documents. The deed attached to our family legacy represented far more than ownership. It connected generations spanning decades, built on love for the land and its community values. This deed held weight in both law and morality, indicating that I wasn't just fighting for property but standing up for ideals that Karen seemed utterly unwilling to recognize. County records provided insight into the murky transfer practices involved in the absorption of my land into HOA development concerns. A process riddled with questionable approvals and potential fraud from those who had been complicit in Karen's rise. I carefully noted each discrepancy, making sure that when the time came to confront Karen or anyone else involved, I could lay bare their misdeeds without mercy. In addition to organizing physical documents, gathering testimonials from neighbors became paramount. Those who lived around me shared stories of witnessing dubious meetings where decisions were made behind closed doors, often without proper notifications reaching affected parties. Each account reinforced my argument that Karen had operated above reproach while disregarding communal values we held dear. These testimonies would provide context, not just facts, creating a narrative of neglect on her part. As time progressed and Karen continued hosting lavish gatherings in her grand mansion, a hideous display of excess, I grinned inwardly at how these celebrations would also serve as a stage for her eventual reckoning. This allowed me not only to compile evidence but also witness firsthand how deeply she believed she had triumphed over me and what belonged to my family. With every detail falling into place and every emotion harnessed effectively toward justice, anticipation bubbled beneath my surface like steam waiting to be released. Soon enough, everything I had worked tirelessly for would culminate in an undeniable statement against what Karen personified, a reminder that greed would not go unchecked indefinitely. By meticulously preparing myself now, I fortified the foundation upon which I would rebuild after reclaiming what rightfully belonged to me once and for all. The day I had meticulously prepared for had finally arrived, the moment of reckoning when I would file my claim against Karen Miller and the HOA. As I approached the local courthouse, a sense of calm washed over me, dispelling the nervous energy that had accompanied me on this journey. The weight of the documents in my hands felt reassuring. They were not just papers, they were my family's legacy, evidence of our rightful ownership, and a testament to the values that had been instilled in me. Entering the building, I navigated through the familiar hallways that echoed with the footsteps of those who came seeking justice. My heart raced as I approached the filing counter, but I reminded myself that this was the culmination of patience and strategy. I had let Karen build her mansion, letting her believe she was invincible as each day passed. Now, I was ready to shatter that illusion. I handed over my meticulously organized binder filled with property surveys, deeds, and county records, each document a critical piece of my case against her. The clerk processed my paperwork while I stood there, my mind replaying the countless hours spent gathering evidence and preparing for this very moment. Each signature on those documents would signify a turning point, not just for me, but for everyone who felt marginalized by her ambitions. With the claim officially filed, I stepped outside into the sunlight, feeling an exhilarating blend of relief and anticipation. This was not just about reclaiming land, it was about restoring honor to my family's name and standing up against someone who had taken advantage of others' silence. I could almost envision Karen's face when she learned that her dream home, her fortress, was built upon deceit and arrogance. Weeks passed as I awaited my court date. During this time, Karen continued to host extravagant parties in her opulent mansion, seemingly oblivious to the storm brewing around her. It infuriated me to see her flaunt her wealth while being blind to the consequences of her actions. Each laugh and cheer from those gatherings echoed hollowly in my ears. They were celebrations built on a foundation of greed that would soon be challenged. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. As I entered the courtroom, I felt an electric charge in the air, a mixture of anxiety and resolve. Friends and neighbors who shared their stories stood alongside me, reinforcing the narrative against Karen's disregard for community values. Their support bolstered my confidence. This was no longer just my battle, but a collective stand against tyranny. As we sat waiting for proceedings to begin, I caught sight of Karen across the room, her self-assured demeanor faltering slightly as she scanned her surroundings. Perhaps she sensed that today would not end in victory for her after all. When it was finally time for us to present our cases, I stood tall, ready to unveil every shred of evidence I had painstakingly gathered. Each document displayed was not merely a legal formality, but a story waiting to be told, a story where greed met its match in rightful ownership and community integrity. With every word spoken during my presentation, I saw Karen's composure slowly unravel as she grasped the implication of what was happening. Her empire built on illusion was now under siege. The realization dawned on her face as I laid out our case, an indictment against everything she embodied. She had underestimated not only my resolve but also the power of community standing together against one individual's relentless pursuit of wealth at any cost. As I spoke about our land's history and its significance to our family, I felt empowered by a deep sense of purpose. This was more than a claim, it was a reclamation, not just of land but also of dignity and respect for all those who believed that integrity should triumph over greed. Whatever happened next, I knew one thing: we would no longer allow ourselves to be silenced by arrogance or excess. Today marked the beginning of something transformative, not only for me but for Maple Ridge itself. The courtroom was charged with tension as I stood before the judge, the weight of my meticulously prepared case resting heavily on my shoulders. Karen Miller sat across from me, her expression a mix of confidence and growing unease. She had spent countless hours crafting her image of success within the community, and now, with every piece of evidence I presented, that carefully constructed facade began to crack. As I laid out the documents, property surveys detailing the boundaries that had been sacred to my family for generations, the deed proving our ownership, and county records exposing the dubious methods by which my land had been absorbed into the HOA's development, I could see the realization dawning on her face. Each piece of paper was not merely a legal formality, they were pieces of a puzzle that illustrated a story of betrayal and greed, one that she had authored with her own hands. The atmosphere shifted as I recounted the history of my land, weaving in anecdotes about family gatherings and cherished memories tied to every inch of soil. I spoke passionately about what this land represented, not just to me but to the entire community that had been overlooked in Karen's quest for power. With every word, I watched as her composure faltered, her confidence waning under the weight of truth. When it came time for her to respond, Karen attempted to regain control. She launched into a defensive tirade about property values and community development, but her arguments felt hollow against the backdrop of my compelling narrative. It was evident that she had underestimated not only my resolve but also the collective spirit of those who stood with me in solidarity. Neighbors who had felt the impact of her decisions nodded along in agreement, reinforcing my position. The dramatic confrontation reached its peak when I pointed out how her dream home, a monument to her arrogance, had ultimately become a symbol of her downfall. The very mansion she believed would elevate her status was now a glaring reminder of her disregard for community values and ethical integrity. As I concluded my presentation, I could see the anger mixing with panic in her eyes. It was clear she hadn't anticipated this turn of events. When the judge called for a recess to consider the evidence presented, I felt a rush of adrenaline. This was it, the culmination of my strategy, patience, and unyielding desire for justice. As I stepped outside to gather my thoughts, I could almost hear the whispers among those who had come to support me. They reflected not only their belief in my cause, but also their own grievances against Karen's heavy-handed tactics. In that moment, I understood that this was more than just about reclaiming land. It was about restoring dignity to a community that felt marginalized by one person's unchecked ambition. The realization settled deep within me. I was no longer just fighting for my rights. I was fighting for everyone who believed in fairness and integrity. As we returned to the courtroom, I held my head high, ready to face whatever came next. The tide had begun to turn against Karen Miller, and I felt an invigorating sense of hope. Whatever judgment awaited us would resonate far beyond these walls. It would affirm a commitment to challenge injustice wherever it appeared. Today marked not just my triumph, but a collective awakening that demanded respect for both our histories and our futures. In this battle against tyranny fueled by greed, we would emerge victorious together. As I left the courtroom, still buzzing from the confrontation with Karen Miller, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The experience had been transformative. Lessons in patience, resilience, and the deep-seated need for justice had weighed heavily upon me. In a world often dominated by ambition and greed, it was a reminder that those who wield power must be held accountable, especially when their actions threaten the foundations of community and shared values. I thought of Karen's mansion. What she had envisioned as her triumph, a sprawling edifice of wealth and stature, had ultimately become a symbol of her downfall. It was ironic that the very structure she built to elevate herself in the eyes of others was now indistinguishable from a monument erected to expose her hubris. I realized then that unchecked ambition can cloud judgment, blurring the lines between success and responsibility. The long game I had played while quietly gathering evidence was not just about reclaiming land, but about drawing attention to a broader issue: the potential danger posed by individuals in positions of power who prioritize personal gain over community well-being. Karen had embodied this danger. She had disregarded the history embedded in our land and neglected her role as a steward of our community. Each lavish party she held echoed not triumph, but ignorance, showcasing her inability to recognize the implications of her actions. Patience had become my armor throughout this ordeal. By allowing myself the time and space to carefully cultivate my strategy, I resisted the urge to lash out impulsively in anger. Instead, I transformed that anger into focus, channeling it into research and planning each step of my approach before the confrontation. It felt liberating, not just to reclaim what was rightfully mine, but also to demonstrate that one person's greed could not overshadow collective integrity and accountability. Now, as I contemplated the aftermath of the hearing, I understood that this fight wasn't merely about winning or losing. It was about fighting against the dismissiveness that had permeated our community under her leadership. It reaffirmed my belief in the power of grassroots organizing, neighbors rallying around shared values to confront those who assumed they were untouchable. My resolve to restore dignity extended beyond my personal gain. It now included nurturing a sense of unity among those around me. Each step taken reinforced my conviction that when one fights for justice with diligence rather than revenge, it can lead to powerful change. People within Maple Ridge were beginning to open their eyes, realizing that collectively we could stand firm against those who seek to undermine our connections for their selfish ambitions. In these reflections, I found strength anew. The road ahead would not be without its challenges, but equipped with this fire for justice and enveloped in the support of a community awakened to its potential, I was prepared for whatever lay ahead. As Karen's opulent mansion loomed in the distance, a constant reminder of both what had been lost and what could still be salvaged, I realized that my journey toward rightful reclamation was far from over but was bravely underway. Together, we would challenge the status quo and redefine what it meant to be a leader in our beloved Maple Ridge. As I stood in the shadow of Karen Miller's lavish mansion, reflecting on the whirlwind of events that had transpired, I felt a profound sense of clarity about the lessons learned from this arduous journey. This experience had gone far beyond a mere confrontation over property. It had become a testament to the resilience required when advocating for oneself and the importance of preserving family legacies. The fight to reclaim my land was not just about ownership, it was about honoring my grandfather's memory and the values he had instilled in me. It was a reminder that home isn't just a physical space but a reservoir of memories, love, and history, elements that Karen had disregarded in her pursuit of unchecked ambition. As I gazed at the opulence surrounding me, I recognized that while she may have constructed her grand home, she had also built walls around herself, walls that ultimately isolated her from the community that once supported her. In challenging her authority, I had discovered an unwavering strength within myself. Patience had been my ally throughout this journey. I had learned that taking the time to gather evidence, plan strategically, and build relationships with my neighbors would yield far greater results than rushing into confrontation fueled by anger. Through this process, I understood the value of listening to others' stories and experiences, recognizing that we were all interconnected in our desire to preserve what mattered most, our homes and our community. Moreover, the confrontation revealed to me the consequences of unchecked ambition in community leadership. Karen's desire for power had blinded her to the fundamental responsibilities associated with such roles, the obligation to safeguard not only her interests but also those of others in our neighborhood. Her actions served as a cautionary tale about how ambition can distort one's priorities and lead to ethical lapses if left unexamined. As I re-entered my community after the court proceedings, buoyed by support from neighbors who shared their frustrations with Karen's heavy-handed tactics, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. We were no longer just individuals fighting our own battles, we were united in our resolve to uphold the values of integrity and respect within Maple Ridge. The collective awakening sparked by my claim against Karen signified that we could challenge anything or anyone threatening our unity. Ultimately, this journey taught me that standing up for oneself does not merely lead to personal triumph, it can inspire others and cultivate change within a community. The lessons learned transcended my individual circumstances and became a call to action for everyone who believed in fairness and accountability. Now, as I look toward the future, I am committed to ensuring that my family's legacy endures, not solely through land ownership but also through fostering a spirit of collaboration among my neighbors. Together, we can redefine what it means to belong and thrive as a community that respects its history while boldly embracing its future. This experience has reinforced my belief, true strength lies not in isolation but in unity, a lesson I will carry forward into every challenge ahead.